Software's eating the world, but AI's eating that too. Ship, learn, fix, that's how we get AI right. Look at your fucking data, keep the quality tight. Out of the lab, into the field, time to deploy. Real world problems, real solutions, that's what we employ.
Welcome back to How AI is Built. Today we host Dexter Horthy in a therapy session for anyone who is drowning in 30-step tool chains. Dexter is the founder of HumanLayer and recently wrote a piece on the 12-factor agents, which is like the 10 commandments. And we talk about why MCP servers are really skinny clients and why it's okay, why human in the loop is the key to enable agents to write instead of just read. So agents that can act but still have to ask first. And that's what Dexter's building at HumanLayer. And also how to kill token bloats in agents. Let's do it. I have been doing way more with MCP just based on your comment. And it's really interesting. Also what you mentioned with the roadmap, that it hasn't been evolved in any way. There's nothing.
The roadmap for MCP?
Yeah, that they haven't adjusted it, nothing new.
It's interesting when you go and try to build a protocol. The idea is we figured this out and this is going to be how it is for a while, and that's why we built the whole protocol around it. But I don't know, the last couple of days there has been a bunch of people showing up on Twitter and X and stuff and saying oh, this is not the protocol I would have built. To paraphrase, some people said some much more aggressive stuff, but I finally played with it on late Friday night, beyond just using MCP servers, but building a program that a CLI that actually implements and calls and discovers servers. And I don't know, the libraries that people have built around it are cool. I think it works. What have you been messing around with it?
I have been in the end, I've tried most of them. I've looked at how also GitHub and Sourcegraph have implemented their stuff, and in the end, it's client-side API wrapper. It's my interpretation of MCP, and I think this is also how it should remain, because then it's on the actual implementation, or the actual implementation of the server calling code has to handle all the authentication.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people call them MCP servers, but I keep saying they're more like clients when you look at what the code is and what it's doing. The other thing I've seen a lot of people say that I kind of identify with is I want MCP but for non-LLM code. I want a simple, uniform way to be able to discover and build clients for RESTful services. Or whatever it is, right? I'm building an agent that talks to the Vercel API, and most of the code is deterministic. It's not an LLM making the calls, and I want to be able to, there is an SDK for it, but it's a little arcane. I have to go read the docs and learn it. If there was an MCP server for it that I could easily call from deterministic code, that would, I feel that would make a lot of people's lives a lot easier. I think some people are starting to do this, but
yeah, I've seen it yesterday. Open Control. And I think they're basically building something that wraps your functions in your code base and basically adds the MCP layer around it. And they do it with all the functions. So this is really interesting in my opinion, because it makes it easier to adopt it and expose the functions to the LLM. But yeah. I haven't checked out how they host it yet. So they mentioned it deploys to AWS Lambda workers or containers automatically. So it's by the guy who built SST. But I still have to check it out.
Interesting. Okay. The other thing with MCP is I'm wondering, how do I put this? How do you think that we should solve auth for that?
I think MCP shouldn't handle it, to be honest. That's my current assessment, because I think
it shouldn't be in the protocol, and
no.
If you are able to access the server over standard IO or whatever, then you should be assumed to be authenticated however the client
Yeah.
is authenticated.
Yeah. If you're authenticated, like you as a user, because I assume at the moment that MCP will remain a tool that mostly is on client side and is interacting either with local tools or with tools like on the server through a local tool. And so the tool itself should handle all the authentication via API keys that have to be set or via service accounts or whatever. I don't think it would be like something that interesting for like MCP to implement it, because it will open like a can of worms of like different schemas of authentication.
Okay, so I guess here's like a more concrete example that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Like, let's say I have an MCP server for let's say the Stripe API, right? Stripe has an MCP server, and I want to allow my agent to like list customers, list products, list users. Maybe it can even create customers and products, because these things are like not quite, they don't involve the handling of money. But when it wants to like send an invoice or send a payment link or like generate a new payment link or something like that, then I want to be able to like kind of have a human in the loop for parts of that, right? Or like approve it or like pause it. This is the thing I think a lot, because we think a lot about like human in the loop for AI that's like running out in the world. But I'm thinking like, should that come between the LLM and the call to MCP? Or do you think there's a world where that lives embedded inside the MCP server, in between kind of like the protocol layer and the actual like accessing the upstream tool?
I would expect like on setup, when you're setting up your MCP, you're configuring like what does it have access to, like what are the different servers. And on setup, like if one of these tools needs to have like API keys, access tokens, whatever, you need to set them. And I think like tools should implement the fine-grained access themselves how they see fit. So Stripe should allow you to basically generate access tokens, service accounts for the different actions an agent could take, or for the different API endpoints.
Okay, so you would be able to create maybe even multiple different MCP servers or clients or whatever we're calling them now, and one of them would have your API key that had like, you know, full write access, and one of them would just have the read access key, and then you would control access by like which MCPs you actually expose to the LLM in any given context.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like this. How deep have you gone on this idea of like because the other thing I was thinking was like, if the MCP is going to hold like authorization or permission or like pause to get input before it actually executes a tool, it kind of needs to maintain a little bit of state. And we kind of have to move into this like asynchronous world, right? Where like if the LM calls a tool and the MCP bounces back with like, oh, we're asking for permission for that. Now the LM has to either like the orchestrating code has to know to pause until it gets something on a socket or a webhook, or the LLM has to have some kind of other tool that is like, let me check the status. And it's just going to sit there checking the status and like round tripping tokens to the LLM and checking the status again until it comes back as completed or approved or rejected or whatever. But there's this idea of like MCP. So I'm not advocating for that. I think that's the wrong approach. But like there's something there for like, how do you orchestrate asynchronous operations where you don't want the LLM to just sit there churning through tokens, but you kind of need it to pause for some amount of time because and it may not be, you know, looping in a human, it may be launching another job or like shelling out to some other agent that's going to go churn tokens for a couple minutes, and you don't want your agent sitting there like waiting, listening for an answer kind of thing.
Yeah, I think especially in Windsurf, what they're doing, like all the different tool calls they're doing, like whether it fails, they just continue with like the plan they set in the beginning. I would assume we need, like in the task planning, we need to be a little bit smarter, that we have to add metadata, like what tool calls, for example, are required. So we basically retry when it fails. And this would also allow us to basically get something in play which is more like durable execution, like deboss, read state, a restate or temporal, where you basically maintain the state just in a SQLite database. And you have like the input state when the function is basically when the function enters, and when it exits, it's basically you maintain the state through it, and you basically clear the cache at some point, like whenever like a chat is finished or whatever. And this should be like easy enough to implement because you're storing most of the chats anyway.
Okay, so you're kind of storing when you talk about like DBoss and temporal, those ones are really interesting because like, and like even something like LangGraph, right? LangGraph, where you kind of have this, you have your business state, right? Which is your context window, your messages object, and that's customizable, but almost everybody I know is just using like a stream of OpenAI messages to go back and forth to the LLM and call tools, whatever. And then you have your execution state, which is like, which graph node are we on? And that's all like, and like which transitions have we done? And that's all like checkpointed in a write ahead thing with SQLite or with the cloud thing or whatever you're using, right? Like, have you gone inside the LangGraph SQLite schema and like the stuff that it stores in there?
I have never touched LangGraph. So I've always rolled my own framework when I did some workflow stuff.
That's fun. I am neither a fan nor a disparager of any AI framework. They're all interesting and they're all solving their own problems. But like this is what I've been doing a lot of lately as well, as kind of rolling my own framework, because I think in a lot of ways, like code itself is already a graph. Like if you're doing if, while, else, whatever, you're already building a DG. Like there's a reason we used to represent like software programs as little flowcharts, because it's all just a graph anyways. And so like if you want the checkpointing and that kind of stuff, and you map your mental model onto a specific programming model like DBoss or temporal or I think LangGraph actually falls in that same category of like structure your code a certain way, and you get these benefits of resumability and interruptibility.
Yeah, I think like the durable, I really hate when you have like two different sets of state and they don't really fit into the same schema. Yes. So like this is something where I would love to see like some standardization on, like that I have like one base or we have some tools which just are like an intermediate, like a middle layer, which just translate, and everyone just use the same like message schema that we have for like years. I got so annoyed when OpenAI started to basically use the developer tag instead of like system.
They have a developer. They changed the name of the system message?
They have a new role, yeah.
This is what I get for not paying attention. Man, I love not paying attention to OpenAI launches. This is great. I wish you hadn't told me that, but I'm glad to have been oblivious to it up until now.
I would say like, it's just, I want standards. And like the function calling stuff, in my opinion, it's like, I can translate between all of those pretty easily. So I will just pick like, when something new is built, just pick what's commonly adopted and don't annoy me to actually first understand your schema so I can write my own middle layer to basically translate between what I'm generating and what you have.
Yeah, I mean, so not only do I think that like, yes, I agree, and all of your context should be like, I basically have this thesis like, for most applications, your state of the application and the context window you're passing to and from the LLM can often be the same thing, even for like fairly complex multi-agent kind of flows. I think that, and then beyond that, like I think the context window doesn't have to be a string of like messages in the OpenAI JSON format. I think one of the biggest challenges in making agents is like keeping the context window controlled and tight and focused. And I think even for workflows that go to like 20, 30, 40 steps, which is where I think a lot of people start to see agents kind of break down and get lost and lose focus and kind of like spin through some like weird context stuff where they're trying the same broken approach over and over again. You've seen this, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in those worlds, like if you can add an extra 10 steps of focus by being way more token efficient, I think you gain a lot. And one thing I've learned in like digging into like, I don't know, there's some tools that do like token visualization really well. And you can see that like JSON is not necessarily the most token efficient way to manage a context window. I know once the JSON hits the LLM, they're doing a bunch of conversions and tokenizing it into like user and system and things like that
Yeah.
under the hood. But I've found, and this is a little more vibes than benchmarks, but like rather than having like system user tool calls, tool answers, tool calls, tool answers, tool calls, tool answers, etc. I just do system and then user, and in the user message, I put like a concise. I happen to be one of the like people who's into doing like XML and prompts, but I'll just take everything that's happened, all of the like messages and all the tool calls and all the tool answers, and like serialize them however you want into one user message. Because at the end of the day, when you pass in a context window to an agent and say like call tools and or tell me you're done, one of those two things, you're basically saying, here's everything that's happened. What's the next step? And you can structure that question however you want.
What I am playing around with at the moment is actually, because in the end, it's just a stream of tokens. Like the LLM, it has a notion of like this chat model because we trained it into it through like the just special tokens. But I think like, especially in agent stuff, we are giving it tasks to complete. So I'm thinking more in the direction, I want like a task description with a set of requirements, and I'm updating it as the chat goes. And everything that doesn't serve me a purpose of actually like making this task description better and giving me more context should just be thrown away. So I'm basically updating this task description and the context window with more and more stuff as the conversation goes on. But anything irrelevant, like failed attempts and stuff like that, if it doesn't add any new value, or I'm on like the 5th failed attempt, I would just throw it away.
So, well, yeah, the other thing is like the more you do the same failed attempt, you're almost like few shot programming the model that it's like, oh, after this thing fails, I try it again and it fails again. And it's like training itself in that one context to continue doing the broken thing, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever explore like when you talk about this, like, are you hand pruning a context window as it's growing? Like, is that the experience you want, or are you more like, I want the model to delete its broken parts that it thinks it doesn't need anymore?
I'm using an LLM. In the end, like all the like LLM compressions, like in agents, the stuff that came out early. I'm not sure, there was like one Microsoft library which was used for compressing the context window. And I was always like, usually you build something task specific so you can give it information. Okay, what information is valuable? What do I want to keep and what do I want to throw away? And the model's job basically is to copy paste relevant stuff into the context window. I think there should be a smarter way, but it's really hard to basically, like, you can't really do it algorithmically.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things in AI in the next year or so is going to be continuing to hone in on this, like, which parts of this can humans do well versus which parts like can be left to the LLM. And I think we're having this constant rotating of like, oh, humans are on the chat side of this and the LLM handles everything of all the calling and tools and like manages its own context and stuff. And it's like rotating through a little bit where like, actually the LLM's better at writing its own prompts than humans are. And humans should actually, like, there are things about managing the context window that the LLM just isn't very good at.
Yeah. What I'm always thinking about is like, because it's generative models, they're supposed to generate. And I think like what most people aren't doing is like generating a lot of options and then by your expertise and taste, picking one that's actually decent and that you like. And I think, are we enforcing like something like we want really like deterministic outputs by doing like all the supervised fine tuning and RLHF and taking like the creativity out of it that we would want if we generate like lots of options because we want diversity?
Yeah. I mean, have you found like specific projects where like you've actually like baked that options and human choice of the outputs into what you're doing?
I have experimented with training my own like LLM for writing, and for that I use base models mostly, and
Okay.
just like continuing the pre-training with only what I've written before and pieces of writing I like. And it's like 90% of the outputs you can throw away, but like 1 in 10 is like really, really good and really hits it on the head. And I
Okay.
think like this is something really interesting that I'm a little bit missing and no one is really exploring.
Is how I mean, do you think a model could have picked out of those 10 which one was the best, or is like it had to be you?
I think it could be a model, but I think you would need to align it and give it like some structure of what you're looking for.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Because
I
think,
use
like,
models. Yeah, go ahead.
this is more of a deterministic task. Like I want to pick the best thing. This is a deterministic task, so fine tuning and RLHFing for that is pretty good. Like, but generating a text, I think like I want the creativity. I want like very different options, which is really hard to get if you're using the same model and giving the same input, slightly different instructions. Like you're still getting pretty overlapping outputs.
Interesting. What were you fine tuning? Like, were you fine tuning on your own writing,
Yeah.
or like, yeah, okay.
And I have like a bunch of like people I follow, which I just basically copy pasted their text as well. Where I really like the writing style.
Did you try doing that with RAG? Like, just like pushing samples into the context window? Like, did that help at all?
I think for RAG, a lot of times it
Or
then
not
gets
RAG,
confused. Like when I pull in like slightly related content, like for me it's like mostly data and AI stuff. I pull in
Yeah.
slightly related stuff and it suddenly adds like a few sentences on like a different topic which was in the context window and like which is completely different to like the input I fed it. And I think
This
like
is
I'm so
you're giving
torn
it
on
knowledge when you really want to coach it on style, right?
yeah, I'm really torn on few shots when it's not about like up-to-date stuff or like knowledge-based stuff, but rather it's like style and like forming the output.
The best prompt engineers I know are pretty anti few shot because it's like you're giving the model too much direction and you're limiting its scope of what it can, again, from what you're saying about like generating and being creative.
Yeah, it's
The thing I've always wanted is like, I'm curious if you tried this, is like I want a model that writes like me so badly. And my like poor man's version of this is a very like raggy version where it's like you just put stuff into context. But like setting up a writing workspace in something like Cursor, taking everything I've ever written that I like the tone and the style of, and dropping it in the folder so the Cursor will pull it into the context window, and then just start writing a new article, or even do like Cursor auto completions or Command K to be like, hey, write a paragraph about this. And then it's just Claude, right? So it still needs to be heavily edited, but it can start auto completing from what's already in the document. And so in those moments of writing where you're blanking, it can actually fill it in and be like, oh yeah, that's what I was going to say, or that's what I wasn't going to say. Like having something to say, no, that's wrong, is actually super valuable in writing, to be able to figure out like, okay, but what I actually want is this, versus I'm stuck, I don't know what to say here.
yeah, but it will be difficult to like use negative examples in the context window as well, like negative few shots. This will be interesting whether it would work.
Oh yeah,
don't write like
I don't
this.
know. I don't know how you would do that. Yeah, yeah, just name it trash article. Do not copy.
Yeah, I'm using like most of my writing is in Cursor because I'm just writing a Markdown block basically on Astro. So I write directly in the editor, so I don't have the friction of copy and pasting around. And I feel like they have some stuff in the system prompt which primes it for coding. So I feel like when I use raw Claude, it's way better at writing because it knows like, okay, I'm writing something and not doing anything else. In like Cursor, I feel like they have something in there which primes it for coding or writing documentation or something.
I think that's probably right. Have you found any good writing tools that give a cursor like experience, but for that raw Claude like writing moment?
No. But it's like I tried pseudo-write, for example. I tried Lex by Avery, lex.page.
Okay.
I tried Spiral, which is basically like reformatting content. So like it assumes you have one piece of content, like a tweet, and you want to go to a blog post, or you have a podcast and you want to go to a LinkedIn post. And they bank really heavily on few shots. But I feel like they're all using the same models, and I feel like it's really limited, like what they can do with a few shots, and without really clear instructions, like what I want to get out of it. And in my own writing, I started to do basically, I write it out, and I give the same input to an LLM, and when it gets close to what I've written, I don't post it, because I think like it's already on the internet. It's like slop that's already out there. I don't need to edit.
Yeah. Yeah, the slop thing is really hard. I've been experiencing this thing lately with like both with code and new projects and with writing projects, where it's like you have a really good idea and then you're like, cool, I'm gonna ask Claude to help me build this out. And sometimes it does it and it's pretty good and you can iterate it from there and like make it good. And sometimes it comes out so sloppy, just like Claude's having a bad day or GPT's having a bad day, and you have this like internal churning. I don't know what there's probably some long German word for this feeling where it's like that could have been a good idea, but instead I gave it to a model and the model didn't do a good job on the first try and it didn't do a good job on the second try, and now like I hate everything about it and I have to throw it away.
I think like that's like this. The issue I have with LLMs, I want them to first generate options, and then I want them to basically go explore, exploit. Like use that. In the beginning, explore, give me a bunch of options. Then when I find something I like exploit heavily into that. But I think like directing that is really hard. There are a bunch of people who do like this spec-driven prompting, like generate a really detailed specification first of what you want to build, and prompt the LLMs to ask like a bunch of follow-up questions, and then automatically generate like prompts for the different components and what you want to build. But also with that, I never really had like the success. Because I think like if you build a bunch of stuff, you have like so much stuff in your head already, like how you would build it, like what tools you like, what tools you don't like. And I think like the LLM never gets it correctly.
Like when you're building systems like that, are you just like hacking it together with code, or are you using some of these like more like WYSIWYG like agent playgrounds?
To be honest, like most of my day is just spent in NeoVim or Cursor, like one of these two, and I don't really like to exit them because I think like staying in the flow and staying in the same tool really keeps you focused on doing whatever you're doing.
Right. You switch to a window to use ChatGPT, and then suddenly you end up with 6 LinkedIn tabs open or something, right?
6 LinkedIn tabs and 500 shorts in on YouTube.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm curious, just like what are you building these days? Like what have you spent the most time like hacking on lately?
So really hacking. One of those was like this task description and task update. I think a lot is like, you can summarize it as like context engineering.
That's it. Everything is context engineering. Like all of RAG, all of agents, all of multi-agent stuff. It's all like, how do we get a good focused context to a model so that it can do a good job?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm always thinking like you have a bunch of different like data structures of way to present the information. One is like a profile where you basically have like set fields and you're just updating them all the time. Then you have like a knowledge graph, which is just like you're capturing facts and stuff like that. And then you have like just raw dumps of data, which is like a vector store, or like you have a SQLite database on top, you're running some form of search. And you can build, I think, like really much with these 3 components, but usually you have like the important part is the metadata. Like, how do I attack the data so I can slice and dice my data in a way that creates like an interesting representation, like whatever I'm doing.
Or the LLM.
Yeah, like a timeline, for example. Like often it's really interesting to present like basically history of the same file. Like I have the past commits of the same file and basically show it like how did it evolve, and then tell it, okay, I want to do this next.
Interesting. Okay, because that's almost like building it's velocity rather than position almost.
Yeah, and I think there's like so many different representations which you can craft. And I think like we barely touched the surface of figuring out like how can we best represent the information to get like a really good output.
And are you doing any kind of like evals or testing or harnesses around all of that? Like, is it? I feel like as a solo dev hacking on my own stuff on the side a lot, I have the benefit of just being like, yeah, vibes. But
yeah,
vibes. I'm curious, like, but I also have this like deep desire to know for sure if it's not, because like there's this thing of like you tried 6 different prompts and you kind of get lost a little bit of like, okay, which one worked and which is the best thing, and you kind of just like hope it all gets baked into your subconscious somehow, so that the next time you go prompt, you're getting to know the LLM, but it's at a deeper layer than anything that you've written down or that you could prove.
Yeah, I think like this is a pet peeve I have. I think there is still no really good tools for like data labeling, even open source one. I think like our Agia, or however it's called, like the Hugging Face one, is decent. Okay. But it takes like always a while to actually define the different fields, like what do I want as an output, then coming up with rubrics, like how do you want to score that shit, is also like, it's really difficult. There is, by the way, there's a really interesting talk on the AI Engineering Summit by Will something. Okay. And he's talking about rubric engineering, which I think was a really interesting term. And I think like this could also be really interesting in the future for creating automatic validations, LLM as a judge, and basically steering them in good direction by really carefully crafting rubrics for whatever output you have.
So the rubric is about scoring the like data triples that you're actually like going to feed into the model as fine tuning data.
Yeah, I would say like mostly scoring the output, like how good is the output, and basically breaking it down into different rubrics and scoring it along that dimensions on like a Likert scale.
That's super interesting. Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about like how can we make it really easy and like effortless to like bring in non-technical people to help with the data labeling process. I kind of have this thesis of like you're building some kind of AI agent or some kind of LLM task, right? And you want it to do something like send cold email outreach and put a bunch of slop out in the world. But you're saying like, hey, we're gonna do one that's actually good. It's gonna do good cold outbound and it's gonna have good context and do this thing. One of the things you can do is you can, bring a bunch of salespeople one of the things you can do is you just outsource it to Scale AI and say, hey, I need a bunch of data that like makes it more like this, and like have some outsourced thing and get your data set. The other thing that we are like still exploring, but I think this works really well is put your AI in a Slack channel with 4 of your best salespeople, right? I think of the best salesperson in my last startup. If I gave him a spreadsheet of 100 data points and told him to like score these, read these 100 emails and tell me on a scale of 1 to 10 like why they're good or not, never going to happen. Literally never going to happen. I could ask him every day for a year and it would not happen. But if you change the mental model and you say, hey, look, we have this AI SDR, it's going to do your outbound for you, but it's going to ask permission before it sends every email. It's going to drop a note in this channel, and it's going to try to do really high quality outreach. But the only thing you have to do is you have to tell it when it does a bad job and why. And the idea would be like you have people who are non-technical but have a lot of business context. And I would love to see the sorts of systems where you just drop this thing in Slack and have the salespeople yell at it all day, and every 2-3 weeks you generate enough fine-tuning data. I mean, you have to change the raw Slack messages of like, hey, this is bad and here's why, into fine-tuning data, but I think an LLM can do that. And like start to generate a rubric from raw human feedback But it's rubric engine. So there's like a couple steps in the pipeline because you got to generate the triples and you got to generate the like scores on it. But I mean, these sort of systems are really interesting to me of like in real time re-steering so that you can make sure that like nothing quite like atrocious or too sloppy actually goes out. And then, every couple of weeks being able to fine tune or generate evals or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think like the why is probably also like a big kicker. Like a lot of people will get annoyed by actually giving a reason why it's shit. Especially like after you have done like 50 of those, I think like the like amount of people who are still sticking with it really drops. I think like doing something like, have you thought of that? Like marking what's good and what's bad. Like I have no clue whether that's possible in Slack. That you have like a cursor and you're just dragging it over the text. Like this part is good, this is bad. Like he's just marking two different spots. And then you basically give like a thumbs down on the entire email. And then you have like more fine-grained feedback. Like you have good parts, but you have bad parts. And you can even interpret it like the email is declined. So the bad part is really, really bad. So you can put like a weight on it.
Interesting. I like that. I mean, what it comes down to is like, I think there is a new generation of really good labeling interfaces that we're going to need, whether it's like, hey, I parse this PDF and here's all the fields I got out, and a human goes through and says like, these three are wrong. Or what you just described of like, either whether it's like, we talked to people of like doing transcript labeling. This is a big thing. And what you just described, I think, is really big in transcript labeling, where it's like, mark the parts of the transcript that are wrong and change them to be correct. But yeah, which parts of the email are slop is an interesting one, and like I think you will, if you can figure out a way to convince people that like, hey, doing this work will limit the amount of slop in the world, you're gonna get a lot of fans because it's a real problem.
I'm always wondering, what do you think is like, are we with LLMs, especially like the popular ones like ChatGPT, are we always converging towards mediocre?
The LLM or the human race?
No, the LLM. Because it's trained on feedback data in the chats with like the general population.
I don't know. It's a good question. What are you trying to say about the general population?
That it's average. And I think like when I would want like a writing chatbot, like I wouldn't want it to be trained on my writing. I want it to be trained on like the best technical writers which are out there.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Or like just train it on Ernest Hemingway and that's it. Just dump all the works of Hemingway into a fine-tuning set over and over and over again. I mean, I can't see how I can say no to that question. I don't want to say it out loud because it's depressing, but I think you might be onto something there. What do we do about that? Yeah.
I'm not sure what we will do about that, to be honest. I think it's like, I'm really torn on the future. It's like, I would really love it like going to like, we have a lot of specialized models and they are really great at something. I would really love that to happen. But I think like then most of these models will be stuck within corporate walls because they hold most of the like interesting data around certain topics. So most of us won't be able to participate. And most of these models probably won't see like daylight or get out into like the general population because they will just use it internally because it's a competitive edge. Which would be also good because I hope I would be hired to train the models. But or the second part is like the models just get good enough that we are stuck with good enough and people just get lazy. They don't want to train like something additional on top.
Yeah, the bar is like, I don't need to go from 95 to 97%. Like, It's not worth it. No one cares enough. It's like, what's another example of something like that in the world? I'm trying to think. Where it's like, yeah, we could make this better, but it's fine. Probably most things in the world. You just get complacent, right?
Yeah, I think like The Toyota production system for me is like the exact opposite. Like always pushing further, always going for like more improvements. But I think like just culturally, you see that most companies weren't able to adopt it. Even like they tried like implementing Toyota production system, like Six Sigma Squared or how it's called, Lean, whatever.
This is the same thing. So I organize for like DevOps days and a bunch of like, the platform engineering stuff. And I think the reason why I think anyone who DevOps and Lean and Agile and Scaled Agile, like all the people for whom that's going to work have already adopted it. And everyone else has like, who has failed is like, it's too late. Like it's never going to happen. You know what I mean? Like over the last 10 years, the people who were ever going to figure it out have figured it out, and everyone else is just going to keep doing what they were doing, and it's good enough. Maybe there's your example.
Basically, your pitch is you will never have like the Phoenix project in your own company. It will never happen.
Yeah. It will never happen. I mean, it's like, you've just tried for 10 years and you couldn't make it happen. So I don't know. Maybe after another like generation turns over, maybe try again,
Yeah, it's like same as in science. Like ideas get adopted one death at a time.
Wait, what is that? I've never heard that before.
Didn't you hear that before? That basically the old beliefs have to die out. So like the old regime of all the scientists have to die out, and then like new ideas can blossom.
Interesting. Okay. I don't know. I did physics in undergrad, and I think we were all working so hard and so depressed that they didn't want to share that one with us. Would have pushed some people over the line.
Yeah. By the way, I want to talk a little bit more about like the read-only mode you mentioned last time. I would love to know like why do you think like the read-only mode is really necessary, and do you think we will actually be able to move out of it
for models? Oh yeah. This idea of like most people build agents and then they let the agents do not that interesting things, right? Like there's been all this hype about Manus AI, right? And Manus is like the best researcher and he uses computers that can figure out and can build you a report and answer any question. And I'm like, I watched it for 30 seconds and I was like, I get that this is new and cool and different and better, but I'm not excited by it because I want agents that can actually go do the work for me. I do not want to be copy pasting out of some chat interface into the system that actually does the work, whether it's pasting an email out of ChatGPT or whatever it is. And I think a lot of people explore tool use and agents and all this stuff, and they realize like, oh, the LLM's pretty good, but it's not good enough to get this thing right more than 80 or 90% of the time. And for some actions like spamming cold LinkedIn outbound emails, 80% is great because that's already a numbers game, right? It's like if 20% of your outbound sucks, it's like 20% of your human written outbound probably sucks. So it's like if you can you're just trying to get in front of all the right people and get those, needle in the haystack kind of thing. Like I think 80% accuracy is fine, or even 90% quality, whatever it is. But there's a lot of things that I want agents to do that they cannot do with the 99% or 99.9% accuracy that they need to do to be able for me to actually trust it to do that like fully autonomously. And I think most people have that experience of like, oh, it'd be great if this thing can update my CRM after a call. That is like, oh, it kind of gets that wrong sometimes and it's just creating chaos. And now Salesforce is even worse than it used to be. Like I would rather have no data than bad data, right?
I'm not sure whether you can make Salesforce even worse.
Oh, trust me. I've seen it. But no, so it's like, and you end up being like, okay, I guess we'll just have it output summaries, or we'll build an Oracle that people can ask questions about. Hey, what's going on? But no, so it's like, and you end up being like, okay, I guess we'll just have it output summaries, or we'll build an Oracle that people can ask questions about. Hey, what's going on with this customer? But then you start to have like drift, right? Where it's like, it can query the meeting things. And you have some data over here and you have some data in Salesforce, and you like lose your source of truth. And I actually think that like, we're so close to a breakthrough here where like I get why everyone's obsessed with getting models to like write code and analyze data and do math. Like these are really interesting, important benchmarks. But what they're really valuable for today is like moving information around and keeping everybody on the same page, which you ask any smart, talented, like especially knowledge worker type person, that tends to be their least favorite part of the job. Like most engineers, they hate going into management because your job becomes like keep everybody on the same page, move information around, and keep everybody informed. And so I have this vision of like, you don't really want an agent to go send team updates all over your Slack for you, because again, that should be very high quality. That if that's slop, you're screwed. I'm rambling a little bit here, but basically, my take of all of this is like the models are almost good enough to do these right actions, to do these impactful things, and if you can get it to 90% accuracy with good prompting and good context. And I mean, this is what I started building all these agents for myself that worked in this way, where it would like shoot me a text message or shoot me a Slack message of just like, hey, I'm going to do this. What do you think? And 90% of the time I would just hit approve. And 10% of the time I would send the LLM feedback. And that became so much better than like asking the LLM and then copy and pasting out. It's basically like cursor tab autocomplete for every API, for every tool call in your life, basically. Of just like, hey, this thing happened in the world. Agent looked at it, started thinking about it. Here's what it thinks the next step is. And 9 times out of 10, it's correct. And so like, yes, I still have to do 10% of the work, or let's say 11%, because I have to do the work to actually hit the approve button. But I just made myself 10 times more efficient at that. And so now I can do 10 times as much of that work, whatever thing it is, whether it's customer success or support or sales or engineering management or whatever it is. So that's my take. Maybe the model someday will get smarter. If they converge on mediocrity, like you said, maybe not. But that's where I think we're going.
I think like first, like converging to mediocrity will be one point. And I think like the second trend is like we are chaining more and more calls. Like we are doing task decomposition. And this means like even if the model has like a 99.9% success rate, if I chain like 10 calls, like the failure rate gets increasingly higher.
And it's exponential, right? Because every time you go a little bit off track, you're more likely to go more off track.
So it's like, I'm not sure whether we will hit like this 99.9% task completion rate. I don't believe it. So I think like the human in the loop part will be really important in making that as frictionless as possible. And one big belief of me is like actually going into the tools where the people actually like spend their time and just like pushing it into that.
Yeah, people don't want to load up your 16th ChatGPT inspired interface if they can just like, I don't know. I'm sitting in my email inbox and all day dispatching work to agents and hearing back from them via email, and it's great because it's like it almost feels like there are digital people in our company working for us doing stuff.
Yeah. We have built something around content automation, which was really interesting to me, and we built it to be autopilot and like what you're building with human layer, we built that like basically pushing a message and getting approval. But then we heard like the exact opposite. They want an interface where they have like a real app editor and stuff like that, which was really annoying to me. I really like sticking in the back end was really beautiful to me, like using other stuff as apps.
That's right. Yeah. Someone accused me recently of like, Dex, you just want to move all apps to work over email because of LLMs, but also because you've always hated front-end dev, and now you can build an app that's entirely back-end, and the front-end is just plain text over email.
That's just beautiful.
Yeah. Anyways, it's the people who want to write everything in plain text markdown and live in Vim all day and not look at a website.
Yeah. How do you actually think about doing corrections? Because I think like having the interface, you can allow like way more corrections in a little bit more fine-grained way. And I think like when you're in Slack, WhatsApp, whatever, you're limited usually to like messages. So you can't really do like just like fine-grained correction in like a function call.
Yeah, so Slack builder interface, so you could let someone come in and actually edit the fields of a function call. So you could do that, but I think you're right. I think the best way to do this, and I think this is like, again, this is fine tuning for behavior. I don't think this is something that you would use RAG for. Like I think the data you generate from having humans like relabel this stuff is super, super valuable as well. But getting them to do it well is like giving them the right interfaces. So the thing you're talking about, like highlight this sucks and highlight this is good for a email or a message or some kind of like text content, or even just being able to edit it and then we store the diff. Because then you can have the original as, your negative pair and the, updated one as your positive pair. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've talked to people who like, I want to ping a human for input, but we're building robots. And the input task is actually like, I need to show them a picture and have them draw a bounding box on the picture because the robot is stuck and it doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing we're talking about is like building. I think it would be really interesting to see. I think we'll see in this year, whether I do it or not, like a set of open source kind of React components to make it really easy to label data. That's kind of one thing that I'd like to see. And if you're listening to this and you want to collaborate on that, definitely hit me up. Slack has like a.
The question is, do you see it as a plugin? Because I know, like developers especially, I don't have Slack installed or Discord. I just go in through the browser.
Okay.
And I think like using like a plugin would make a lot of stuff easier because you could do the labeling and just send it through a plugin and you wouldn't have to build like integrations into all of the different tools.
When you say, what do you mean by plugin? Like a cursor add-on or something? Or
no, basically just a browser extension.
Oh, interesting. Why a browser extension instead of like a standalone, just like web app that uses components?
Because then he has to go to a new tab.
But the browser extension shows a pop-up on Slack. I see.
Yeah, just a quick overlay, label it, and be done with it.
Interesting. So from Slack, I can do some action, and it actually it looks like I'm interacting with something in Slack, but really it's a browser extension.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't hate it.
Did you know did you use the Arc browser?
Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings about Arc. I won't go into it.
Me too. I think like the one thing that they actually was really good was like their boosts, which made it really easy to build custom extensions. Okay,
I've never built a browser extension, so I'm curious to hear how that goes. Yeah.
And they basically just gave you you had a JS file, you had a CSS file, and you could make like an HTML file to render something. And they basically did all the scaffolding around it. And this made it really easy, and it was really nice to use.
But it only works on Arc.
Yeah, it only worked on Arc.
Interesting. You have to give that a spin. Dude, this has been super fun. I am so glad we got to hang out today.
Nice, yeah. So if people want to follow along with you or give me the 10-second pitch of Human Layer as well. What are you guys building? Who should come to you? Who needs you?
Oh, yeah, sure, totally. So, yeah, Human Layer is an API and an SDK that lets your AI agents that are kind of running out in the world ping humans asynchronously for input and feedback and approvals on certain things. So we have a customer in supply chain that's using Human Layer to, when their agent notices hey, this order is behind, we need to send an email to the supplier. It sends an email to the distributor and says hey, look, we're going to send this email we're going to coordinate with suppliers on your behalf. Here's the email we're going to send. Are you okay with that? And they can reply or they can give it feedback. So a lot of use cases and basically building AI agents that operate in kind of more old school enterprises. You need to have mechanisms and levers to build trust. And so Human Layer lets them build a lot of customer trust that this agent is going to do useful things, but not without approval.
Yeah. And where can people find Human Layer, but also you? Since I had the pleasure of reading through all your tweets.
Did I send you a list of tweets? I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that. Human Layer is, you can log in, sign up. It's self-serve on humanlayer.dev. Give it a spin. Let us know what you think. There's a Discord. I'm on Twitter, Dexter Horthy. I'm on LinkedIn. Please, if you're interested in this stuff, give me a holler. I respond to pretty much everything. So excited to chat with the community here.
So this was our first episode back from a 1-month hiatus. I've decided to revamp the podcast a bit. So this would usually be the place where I would share my takeaways from the episode. But I've decided to restructure the podcast a little bit, and because the episodes were becoming longer and longer, and the takeaways at the end were only like for like a 1 hour episode, we're getting like 10 minutes long. So I've decided to split out the takeaways and publish it as basically a standalone audio. And this should be like, if you are in a rush, if you are in a hurry, or if you're unsure whether the content is relevant for you, this would be the thing for you. So this will be published at the same time. So you will get the episode and only the takeaways. And how I imagine you listening to it is basically, if you're in a rush, just listen to the takeaways. If you aren't sure whether the content is for you, listen to the takeaways. And if you're satisfied, you don't have to listen to the full episode. If it piques your interest, dive deeper into the full episode. So you get like the 2-for-1. As a bonus, I will start to publish more and more of the research that goes into each episode. So usually I spin up quite a few examples, go deep into the different resources on the different tools we are talking about, and develop a GUI, a TUI, a quick example, and spin up a front end. And I will start to share more of my research and my code. And this will probably happen mostly on the YouTube channel, because I will probably add quite a few sketches on TL Draw, the Skelly Draw, or share some code. If you want to catch that, subscribe on YouTube. In general, it would help a lot if you leave a review, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe on whatever channel you're listening, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or on YouTube. It helps with the channel. It also helps me get more reach and get bigger and more interesting guests. Also, I'm always open for guest suggestions. So if you think you know someone interesting, or you're an interesting